Hello, my name is Eli Cunningham, and welcome to my very first podcast. Today I'm going to take you on a trip back to the early 1800s to discuss a time when the Cherokee Nation faced one of the most devastating and unjust events in U.S. history, the Trail of Tears. In this podcast, we're going to dive into what really happened, and not just from a cold and distant historical view. I want to explore the lived experience of the Cherokee people themselves, so that you might get a true sense of how U.S. expansionism and the belief in manifest destiny tore through indigenous tribes, uprooting lives, erasing cultures, and leaving generational scars that still linger today. I'll be using both historical research and first-hand accounts to showcase the betrayal, the resilience, and the legacy of this tragic event. Part 1. Cherokee Life Before Removal. Now, before we get into the event itself, we should establish a background so you have some understanding of who the Cherokee were. The Cherokee people once lived across a large region of North America. Their territory at one point stretched across 8 whole Appalachian states. They were one of the largest and most prominent native nations in the Southeast. The Cherokee had a rich culture that valued traditions, oral history, a strong sense of community, and a deep connection to their land. They farmed, hunted, and lived in towns with established systems of government long before European settlers arrived. Over time, they adapted to the changing world around them, not just to survive, but to hold on to their sovereignty. By the 1820s, many Cherokee communities adopted elements of American settler life. They lived in log houses, built farms, spun cotton, and even developed a formal government with a police force and elected leaders. At the same time, they kept their traditions alive. In 1828, they published their own newspaper, the Cherokee Phoenix, and even had a functioning written language created by Sequoyah. Fun fact, Sequoyah was a Cherokee silversmith who developed the whole writing system for the Cherokee language. All this goes to show that they clearly weren't a primitive group resisting change. They were adapting, while also trying to protect their identity. Despite all this, the United States government viewed their presence as a problem. Then gold was discovered on Cherokee land. Like a match to a powder keg, this discovery set off a wave of greed and violence that would change everything. Part 2. Removal begins. After gold was discovered on Cherokee land in the late 1820s, everything started to unravel at a rapid pace. Land that had been home to Cherokee for generations became a target for white settlers, prospectors, and politicians. The Cherokee Nation had done everything it could to coexist. They formed a constitutional government, embraced a farming lifestyle, even sent their children to school. They assimilated to a lifestyle foreign to their own in as many ways as they could, and yet none of that mattered in the face of greed and expansion. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act, a law that gave the federal government the power to relocate native tribes from their homelands in the southeast to lands west of the Mississippi River. This law didn't just affect the Cherokee, it targeted what were known as the 5 civilized tribes: the Cherokee, Choctaw, Creek, Chickasaw, and Seminole nations. The Cherokee, in yet another showing of adaptation to a foreign government, took their fight to court. Leading that fight was Principal Chief John Ross. He was only 1/8 Cherokee by blood, but he was a man who was deeply committed to his people and their sovereignty. Ross used every political and legal tool he could to defend the Cherokee Nation, from writing letters to Congress to organizing petitions signed by thousands of Cherokee citizens who opposed the removal. He believed that negotiating from a place of law and diplomacy was the only hope for survival, and in Worcester versus Georgia, the U.S. Supreme Court actually ruled in their favor, acknowledging that the Cherokee Nation had a right to its land and government. In response, Jackson unfortunately dismissed the ruling, allegedly saying, "John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it." State governments like Georgia began awarding Cherokee land in lotteries, giving it away to white settlers. If Cherokees refused to leave, they were threatened or forcibly removed. In a desperate attempt to save what was left of their people and avoid annihilation, a small group of Cherokee leaders signed the Treaty of New Echota in 1835. They claimed it was the best option left, to accept $5 million in exchange for their homeland and relocation west. But here's the thing. Over 90% of the Cherokee opposed this treaty. Thousands signed a petition to reject it, but that effort was in vain, and the U.S. government ratified it anyway. By 1838, things reached a breaking point. The deadline to leave their land had passed, and thousands of Cherokees remained in their homes. That's when the U.S. Army and Georgia State Militia came. 6,000 soldiers rounded up nearly 16,000 Cherokee people, often at gunpoint. Families were separated, belongings left behind. People were dragged from their homes in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The forced migration west, what we now call the Trail of Tears, had begun. Part 3. The Trail of Tears. From late 1838 through early 1839, the forced march west began. Cherokee people, men, women, elders, and children, had to walk over 1,000 miles to what is now Oklahoma. Some were crammed into wagons, others rode horses, but the majority of them traveled on foot, often barefoot through freezing temperatures, rainy weather, and rough terrain. The U.S. military didn't provide nearly enough supplies, food, or medicine. People were already sick from being held in overcrowded camps before the march west had begun, and the conditions of the journey only served to make things worse. Dysentery, pneumonia, whooping cough, and starvation spread fast. Sometimes there wasn't even enough time to bury the dead properly. Chief John Ross traveled the trail alongside his people and lost his wife. Apologies if I butcher this pronunciation. I believe her name was Kwati. Lost his wife to exposure during the journey. Just one of the thousands lost. By the end of the journey, it's estimated that at least 4,000 Cherokee people died, which is about a quarter of the entire nation. One woman, named Elizabeth Watts, was told about the removal from her grandparents. In their retelling, they described how the sick, old, and babies rode on the grub and household wagons. The rest rode a horse, if they had one. Most of them walked, many of them died along the way. They buried them where they died, in unmarked graves. In 1890, a U.S. soldier named John G. Burnett, who had taken part in the removal as a young man, later wrote in a letter to his children, "At this time, we are too near the removal of the Cherokees for our young people to fully understand the enormity of the crime that was committed against a helpless race." As a little side note, I found it hard to choose what excerpt from this letter I wanted to include, and I highly recommend reading through it all if you have the chance. It's very easy to find online. Despite all this hardship, the betrayal, the suffering, and the death, the Cherokee didn't just vanish. They arrived in Oklahoma and rebuilt. They found ways to survive, but the trauma from living through the Trail of Tears would live on in the generations that followed. This wasn't just a tragic moment of the past. This is part of an ongoing pattern of indigenous erasure and land theft in the U.S. that is still going on to this day. Part 4. Rebuilding in Indian Territory. After the long and deadly journey west, the Cherokee people arrived in Oklahoma, land that was unfamiliar to them, but now their designated quote-unquote Indian Territory. The trauma still fresh, thousands of lives lost, families torn apart, and a way of life that had been violently disrupted, and the Cherokee still persevered. In the years that followed, the Cherokee Nation reestablished their government. They held elections, drafted a new constitution in 1839, and reformed their tribal council. John Ross, who never stopped fighting for his people, was re-elected principal chief and continued to lead with the goal of protecting Cherokee sovereignty. They also rebuilt schools and resumed the printing of the Cherokee Phoenix. The Phoenix was more than just a paper. It was a symbol of cultural persistence. The community worked to reclaim a sense of stability and dignity. They adapted, yet again, to their new environment without letting go of who they were, keeping their cultural traditions alive. The Cherokee Nation not only survived, they demonstrated a resilience that resisted cultural erasure against insurmountable odds. Their legacy continues as they are the largest federally recognized tribe in the United States. They still face challenges, like many other indigenous communities, but they remain politically active, culturally vibrant, and deeply connected to their history. Today, the Cherokee Nation is rebuilding its cultural heritage through language programs in schools aimed at saving the Cherokee language. Similarly, the U.S. has formally recognized the removal through the Trail of Tears National Historic Trail, a public memorial administered by the National Park Service to educate visitors about this dark chapter in American history. And now, after giving you what I hope was a more detailed and human telling of the Trail of Tears, and closely examining how it affected the lives of the Cherokee Nation, I want to leave you with this. The purpose of history isn't just to study the past. It's about understanding patterns. Which ones die out, which ones reappear, and which ones haven't gone away. Take the Resolution Copper Project, for example. Right now in Arizona, a sacred Apache site called Oak Flat is at risk of being destroyed by a massive copper mining operation, backed by private companies and enabled by the U.S. government. The pattern of land seizure and disregard for indigenous sovereignty and spiritual connection to their land is still happening. So when we discuss the Trail of Tears, we're not just referencing a tragic event from 200 years ago. We're talking about the legacy of trauma, the strength it took to survive it, and the ongoing fight that Native communities are still facing today. Learning this history is just one step. The next is asking what you're going to do with it. Thank you for listening.